Right, so this is the beginning of police powers, and as you can see from the top of the page, we're looking at the area of stop and search. Now, police powers, predominantly stop and search, is governed by the Police and Criminal Evidence Act. So as you can see here, it says page 1984. If you just want to bob at the side of it, please, Police and Criminal Evidence Act. Now, in order to achieve high marks, which you are looking for level 4, you do need to make sure that you do spell it out properly the first time. You can refer to the Act of Parliament as PACE, but you must write it out properly first time round. So you'd introduce by saying stop and search is governed by the Police and Criminal Evidence Act. Then in brackets you could put PACE, and then that would be fine for the rest of the essay. Okay, so PACE is a very, very big Act of Parliament, and it governs all areas of police powers, and different sections are looking at different areas. Now, stop and search is governed by Section 1 of PACE, so you need to be aware that Section 1 is the one that does govern this. Okay. Now, in order to achieve high marks, again, not only do you need to write PACE out properly, but as you can see from here, you do need to make sure you cover all areas. So there's 5 areas of stop and search, and you need to make sure that you cover all 5 if you are looking to get high marks. So if we have a look then, first of all, what does Section 1 say? Well, Section 1 stipulates that for a stop and search, the police officers will be stopping a person or a vehicle in a public place or place to which the public have got access. So it either needs to be in the city centre, on the street, etc. But it can't be in your house, basically, because that is not public access. It's a private land. They can do this if they've got reasonable grounds to believe that they'll find something that you've stolen or something that is prohibited. Prohibited means not allowed. So you've either got something that you've stolen, that they think you've stolen, or something that is not allowed. Okay? Now, because when an Act of Parliament is passed, it takes over a year to get that put in place. We'll then find out that there'll probably be aspects of this that are missing and that need updating, or that we need extra sections putting in. So these here that you can see are 2 pieces of other laws, so the Criminal Justice Act and the Serious Organised Crime Police Act. These are 2 other pieces of laws which have added to Section 1 of PACE. So they've just added other things that can be included. So it says that items made, adapted or intended for burglary can actually be taken away, and that fireworks can. More importantly, fireworks, because we know how dangerous they can be if not done properly. So those items as well can be removed during a stop and search, and that's added to Section 1 of PACE. So yeah, the above items can be seized. That just means that the officers can take them away, not return those items. Anything that we find that could be related to burglary, or anything that's such as fireworks. So your question's asking you what a public place is. Well, as I've said, it's somewhere that the public have got access to. So like streets, parks, any public places, city centres, but it doesn't obviously cover places like your back garden, your house, etc. Right, so they can stop you in a public place, you or a vehicle in that sense. So now what we need to look at is what reasonable grounds actually means. Because as you can see there, under Section 1, they've got to have reasonable grounds. So we need to work out what they think reasonable grounds means. Right, so in terms of reasonable grounds, and as it says there, they must be determined objectively. In criminal law, there's 2 types of tests that we have, a subjective test and an objective test. Subjective is looking at your viewpoint as a defendant, what do you see? Objective is looking at the ordinary reasonable man on the street, or in this case, any other person, any other officer. So the case of Castorina, that's a case there. What was said in this case was that if the normal person on the street would stop and search, then it would be okay to conduct that stop and search in that situation. So if you want to add it onto yours, so if the normal person would stop and search, then that would mean that you would be allowed to. So we're using an objective test, looking at the viewpoint of the average person on the street. Okay? So it must be determined objectively. We'll look at whether they would do it in that instance. Also then, for reasonable grounds, we've got some guidelines. Now, with police powers, there are codes of practice, big book of codes of practice, with guidelines as to how the police officers should treat people during arrest, during detention, during a stop and search, etc. And it governs quite a lot of different areas. Now, each code letter relates to a particular area. So here we've got Code of Practice A. This is what governs the guidelines for stop and search. Okay. Now, they are only guidelines and recommendations, so technically they don't have to be followed. And that's the negative side there, that because it's a guideline, we don't have to follow it. Okay. Now, Code A tells us some things that would be reasonable for actually stopping somebody, and things that would potentially be unreasonable, just so it gives officers guidelines when they're conducting it. So you need to fill in 3 things for each, 3 things that would be a reasonable ground to stop and search somebody, 3 things that would be an unreasonable ground. So your examples for reasonable grounds, things like you're matching a description of somebody that's been radioed in. So maybe somebody's radio saying they've seen somebody in a bright orange tracksuit leaving a house that's not there, so potentially committing a burglary, and you're wearing a bright orange tracksuit. Because you match that description, it would be a reasonable ground to stop and search you. It could be that you are looking very, very suspicious. That potentially could be a way that they would be using that as a reasonable ground. So maybe you've got like a big bulge at your side, so you're hiding something, you're looking very suspicious there, so they want to find out why. That would be a reasonable ground. And then finally, if you've got any weapons on you, that would obviously be a reasonable ground to stop and search you, because depending on what it is, you shouldn't have it in the first place. So yeah, any weapons would also indicate there would have a reasonable ground. So they're just a few examples of reasonable factors. Unreasonable factors, so 3 things that are not enough to stop and search. One of the bigger ones is the fact that you are already well known to the police. So just because you might have been stopped and searched before, or you might have been convicted of a crime before, that doesn't give them an automatic right to stop and search you again. That's unfair. Okay, so just because you're known to the police isn't a good enough reason for them to stop you. Another one would be stereotyping. So if they're stopping and searching you just because of your race, because of your gender, because of your age, that wouldn't be a big enough reason to stop and search you. Okay, just because of that doesn't give them a justification. And then a final reason that would obviously be unreasonable to stop and search you, again slightly picking on stereotyping, but the way that you look. So just because you are in tracky bottoms and you have got a hoodie on, that doesn't give them a reasonable ground to stop you just because you are dressed that particular way. So actually a lot of these are geared towards stereotyping, particular age, particular gender, religion, the way you look, etc., your beliefs. These are all reasons that would be unreasonable reasons to stop and search you, because obviously that's not going to be fair. You're just walking down the street. They wouldn't be able to stop and search you, or they shouldn't stop and search you just because of your age or just because of your gender. Okay. Bottom of the page then, you've got a case, Tomlinson versus DPP. So DPP is the Director of Public Prosecution, so it's working for government. Tomlinson is your defendant. So this case is just showing you that just because you are in a well-known area that might be known for drugs or violence or whatever, that doesn't give a good enough reason to stop and search you. So he was walking up and down Soho in London, and because it's a place where drugs are generally found on people, the police officers decided to stop and search him for drugs. That's not allowed. That's stereotyping based upon where you live. That can't occur. So let's just say Pontefract was well known for guns. They can't stop and search you just because it's well known for guns, alright? That would be stereotyping you based upon the area you live, which is not allowed. Then you just need to turn over onto the next page. Right, so question at the top of the page then, what is Tomlinson and Cody trying to prevent? Well, Tomlinson and Cody are trying to stop people being stop and searched based upon stereotypes. So it shouldn't be happening that you're being stopped and searched just because of where you are, who you are, etc. So we're trying to make sure that all our stop and searches are reasonable and are not using unreasonable grounds. Right, procedure then. So, this is your third area out of the 5. You need to be aware of what the police officers will actually do when they stop and search you, what happens. So, first of all then, we've got the Nsr Procedure. So, this is where the officer will come up to you, he will state his name, he will tell you what station he's from, and he will tell you the reason for the stop and search there as a result. Okay, so name, station, reason do all need to be given. So you need all 3 there in order to make sure that the stop is correct. If they are missing or any element of those are missing, it means that the stop will be classed as unlawful. Therefore, you could just walk away. Okay. If the officer isn't in uniform, so he's in plain clothes, or you want him to, they will produce their warrant card. So it'll just be like an identification. This is who I am, this is where I'm from, etc, etc. Just in case you want them to prove that. Because it might be that, yes, they're in uniform, but it isn't that difficult to go to a fancy dress shop and get a police officer's outfit. So you want to make sure that it is a proper police officer that is stopping and searching you. And then finally, any questions that you are asked, they'll be written down. A written record of the stop and search will be given, and you will get a copy for your protection. So you'll get like a written receipt that will say, right, this is the stop and search, this is why we've stopped him, this is what we've asked, this is what we've found, and then here's the receipt for you for your protection, so you know it's occurred and anything that could end up being put on file. Then we've got a case there, Osman versus DPP. So this is a case where an officer decided to stop somebody on the street, but he didn't give his name and station. All he did was say why he stopped him. He never said anything else. So because your full Nsr procedure was not given, because he only gave his reason, the other 2 weren't there, it meant that the full stop and search was unlawful as a result. Limitations then. So even though the police have got quite a lot of power, they are limited in some respects. So first of all, they're only allowed to use what we call reasonable force. So during a stop and search, if they feel the need to, they can use reasonable force against you. Now obviously it can't be excessive, so they can't be like pinning you down to the floor, sitting on your gun against your head. It's got to be something that would constitute reasonable. Now the problem is the word reasonable has never been defined. So what one officer thinks is reasonable force, another officer might not. So your big problem with that is that it's subjective. It's based on the viewpoint of the officer what reasonable actually is. Secondly, we can do something called a stop and account. Now, a stop and account is where you can be stopped and questioned by a police officer, but they're not able to actually stop and search you. They can't search you. Now, as you can see there, though, it does need to be on a voluntary basis. So they can voluntarily stop an account, but they can't do a voluntary search. And then finally, when they are searching you, they can remove outer clothing. So they're only allowed to take outer clothing off. If you want to fill in for me, outer clothing is things like coats, jackets, scarves, gloves, etc. But it wouldn't include things like t-shirts or underwear. Anything like that that are known as additional items, you need to be taken. You need to be taken down to the station for that. So that's your answer to the question: where can additional items be removed? Down at the police station. Now, as you can see there, then below you've got a case, Rice versus Connolly. So this is a case just showing you that they did a stop and account, and then what happened, the suspect said no, they don't want to answer voluntary questions, and the police arrested him for that. Because it is a voluntary stop and account, you don't have to say yes, it's voluntary. Yes or no. So when he said no and then they arrested him, that automatically became unlawful as a result. Your last area then is other powers. Now, you do need to be careful here because it's other powers outside of PACE. Okay, so what this means basically is If the question says to you to describe the powers of the police during a stop and search under PACE, you wouldn't include this section because it only wants to know powers outside as an extra here. But if you wanted to ask how you can stop and search under PACE, then you would just completely forget about this last section. So these are extra powers that the police have under other pieces of law. So first of all, you've got the Criminal Justice and Public Order Act. This enables police officers to get what we call a Section 60 order. Now, a Section 60 order is where the officers can get a warrant, and it allows them to stop and search anybody for 24 hours in that area, as long as they anticipate violence. So they don't need to have reasonable grounds to do the stop and search. They just need to think that violence could occur, and that will therefore then give them the right to do so. Now, because they don't have to have reasonable grounds, this is quite a controversial power that's available to the police officers here. Now, they'd probably use this in things like your Leeds Fest, Glastonbury sort of situations, any sort of concerts where they think violence could occur. You'll often see officers about, and it's likely that they will probably have Section 60 orders should they need them. Second piece of law then, under the Misuse of Drugs Act. So it allows officers, anyone that they think's got possession of illegal drugs, it allows them to stop and search, and then if they find the drugs, to seize them. Terrorism Act allows extra powers to remove headgear and shoes if they think you're a suspected terrorist, but remember, shoes need to be taken out of public view. And then finally, Sporting Event Act gives powers to police officers to get rid of alcohol if you've got it on you, or don't allow you into a sporting event if you are intoxicated. That's just for public safety and to obviously stop hooliganism occurring at like football games and rugby matches, etc. Now, in terms of the exam, you only need to include 2 of these 4 powers as an extra in order to make sure you get full marks. So definitely this one, because Section 60 is quite an important power, and then the other 3, you just choose another one that you would like to use. So you could either use Misuse of Drugs Act, Terrorism Act and Sporting Events Act, as well as the Section 60 order there. Right, the final thing to pick up on then is to do with wording of the exam paper. Okay, now police powers is a very popular area in the exam, but it does depend on the question as to how you will word it. Okay, so if I just bob a text box on here, basically we've got 2 sets of phrases: powers wording and rights wording. Okay, so for powers wording, what we're looking at then is powers that the police would have during that stop and search. So you would go through all 5 areas of stop and search, but you have to link it to what powers they have. So things like the police officers can do something, or they have the power to do something, or they are able to do something, for example. So you're using phrases that suggest a power upon the police officer. Okay. Whereas, if we are looking at the rights of the individual, so your rights wording, this is slightly different because we're looking at a perspective from you as a citizen, your rights during a stop and search. Now, you would still use all 5 areas, but you would be using phrases that suggest that the police are limited in some way, so that the police officers must stop and search in a public place or place to which they've got access, or the police officers can only remove outer clothing. So you're looking here at rights wording. Now, this doesn't sound like a big thing, but it actually is, because if you're asked the powers of the police, but you use words like this during it, you'll then ultimately underperform, if not fail, that question. And similarly, if you're asked rights of the individual, but you then turn around and say, oh, the police can do this, Again, you're not answering it from our perspective, so you're likely to be underform or obviously fail that question. So you've got to be careful. Now, you are still including all 5 areas, so the content is exactly the same. You will probably find that you have about 8 or 9 phrases that are different, and everything else is the same. So under powers question, powers of the police, you'd start saying, under section 1 of PACE, the police have the power to stop and search person or vehicle within a public place to which they've got access, if they've got reasonable grounds to suspect you've got something stolen or prohibited. If it was asking the rights of the individual, you would say, under section 1 of PACE, the police can only stop and search somebody or a vehicle in a public place or place to which they've got access with reasonable grounds. So you swap in very, very few phrases there, but you're either writing it from a powers perspective or from a rights perspective. Okay, you'll do more on that in class, but that's the end of stop and search. Thank you.